Hi, Tyler Eash. Can you introduce yourself?
Hasasakare Minka Katori. My name is Tyler Eash, and I am an interdisciplinary artist that is Maidu and also of Modoc descent. And I am from the unceded Nisenan Maidu territory of Marysville, California, and we are here today in Paris, France.
So when did you arrive in Europe and why?
I arrived in London in 2017 to get my master's degree in fine arts from Goldsmiths University of London. And the reason why was because I wanted to be an artist and I wanted to be able to talk about who I am and what my family's gone through outside of the confines of America, if that makes sense. And so, yeah, now I'm here.
So can you give a little detail about your practice? What have you been doing these past years?
So my practice concerns a lot of different mediums. I started as a contemporary dancer. I also worked a bit within architecture, but more on now currently I do a lot of painting, sculpture, film, poetry, and performance. But at the same time, because I don't work in this media specific way, I'm always trying to kind of find things that exist at the interstice of different medias. But I guess the intentionality of my practice is something that is essentially what I represent. I am a post-genocidal artist. I'm an artist that descends from an untold chapter of Native child theft, of rape of Native women, of Native slavery, and all of that is because of the legacy of the California genocide, which is also synonymous with the California gold rush. And what I try to do, because I have ancestry that comes from Europe, by both love and by violence, an ancestry that comes from an occupied, genocided indigenous people, being Maidu and Modoc. I try to bridge these identities within myself to then also understand the type of politics and the type of oppressions that we are facing as an indigenous people, and to also be in Europe and to raise awareness outside of that type of censorship, to let people know about things, about the incredible devastating amount of missing and murdered indigenous people, who are also a lot of indigenous women and two-spirits, queer indigenous people like myself, who have been suffering at the hand of violence, of an apartheid system, of this type of erasure, of murder, of incarceration, of addiction, of homelessness, houselessness, poverty, assimilation. There's an entire stack of systems of oppression that exist for occupied indigenous peoples, and not just within my own community, and not just within California or within Turtle Island, North America, but also within the world. And so I think it's been incredibly important to be an indigenous person, not just with a connection to your own ancestral homeland, which I do have in my culture, but also to be in conversation with other occupied peoples, other indigenous peoples, and to see that when you start telling these stories about who you are and about, you know, who maybe you're not allowed to be, then you start to kind of also find the same stories being told in different places. You know, I'm also going to Australia to work with an Aboriginal mob, and we share a lot of the similar history of using rape as a tool of genocide. And with these conversations that are even happening about, is rape even a form of genocide? And people are discussing like what defines genocide, where we're seeing that there's this type of hierarchy of wealth and of color that has made certain groups claim holy words like Holocaust and words like genocide for themselves, and disavowing all of the other genocides that have been occurring repetitively for 500 years. And I think that it's really important for occupied indigenous peoples of the world to show up and be incredibly visible, no matter what they look like, to just state that, to just basically just contribute to this conversation about genocide and occupation, and for us to understand that it is actually a symptom of this incredibly violent system where land is something that's just a resource, where people are a resource, where our animal relatives are also a resource. And I think it's really important for the people who have the most marginalized and most kind of potentially misunderstood spiritual identities to just show up in a very big way and to take up space and to really just reclaim the world stage for us having the ability to just simply out the wisdom of our elders or the wisdom of our cultures or our worldviews. And so I've had to be one of those first people here. So it's like first contact all over again for so many people in my day-to-day life, to have them come and try to understand, to just see me as I am, that they have to kind of crumble and understand a whole different worldview that conflicts their own. But at the same time, these worldviews are incredibly liberatory. They're matriarchal. They celebrate queerness as a connection to spirituality and nature. They don't uphold these hierarchies of wealth. And it all comes to this relationship of place and land, because if the earth is your mother, then everybody is your relative. So you don't have these divisions. You don't have these divisions of nations and of colors. And you also understand that because you're a steward of a land, that your spirituality is tending to nature. And then that land that has been taken to you, right? Simply because you didn't protect it as your own, in this sense, that you own it in this type of very colonial white way. But also, what's also been quite interesting for my time being here is I tried to understand, what is whiteness, right? Like, what is this myth of white culture? That's not to say that European people don't have culture. It's not to say that European people don't have the ability to be spiritual. It's just that what has become the culture that we force all of these occupied and diasporic peoples into taking part in is a culture of assimilation. And I know that it's assimilation because I descend from people who are assimilated into whiteness. And so it's not just that I'm trying to be in Europe and trying to kind of out this untold story of a genocide, or commit it to history, or to define it, to get people who are occupied indigenous peoples of the world adequate representation of the UN, which is due their rights to sovereignty. But it's also to be here with quote unquote white people and people who are assimilated into whiteness, to understand that the culture that participate is simply just a capitalist structure of exploitation of people around the world that is ongoing. You know, people say, like, I'm so sorry what happened to your ancestors a long time ago. And it's like, what do you mean a long time ago? It's now. It's still happening. It's still legal to kill native people, right? There's still an apartheid system. And so I guess if it's like, if you just wake up and just become aware of all these issues and your ability to be vocal, no matter where you are in the world, you just seem completely necessary to just state that. And there's nothing better than just doing that through art if you have the abilities.
Thank
Sorry,
you.
that was a lot.
So now you are taking part of a show in London. Can you tell me more about it and about the collective you just founded?
Yeah, I can tell you about that, but I should first state that it came about in a very collective way. Naturally, out of a community that has been in conversation of both Indigenous and diasporic peoples existing within London. There are artists that represent different corners of the world, whether it be the quote-unquote Middle East, quote-unquote Southeast Asia, quote-unquote South America, quote-unquote Central America, quote-unquote North America. And what it is called Living Land Collective, and it started this year. And our first project is called Ho'owin, which is a Selknam word, which means the forces of nature that have undergone metamorphosis to become humans, to restore balance in the world. And it was gifted to us by one of the artists in our collective, Claudia Ramirez Julio, who is making work outing the continued existence of the Selknam people from Tierra del Fuego, who are people who have a very complicated history, very violent history that is largely in due part to Charles Darwin. And so we are literally doing this exhibition. We won an award, and we were doing it on 8 Dover Street, which is the heart of Mayfair, wealthiest neighborhood within Europe. And somehow we had this opportunity, probably through prayer, where we're just outing our untold stories and reclaiming space and reclaiming our identities with this 7 international diasporic artists, just basically telling their truth. And because of these truths, they tie to different aspects about relationships to nature, about child theft, about assimilation, about genocide, about rape, about occupation, about culture loss and language loss, and also environmental destruction. And it's a really powerful show, and it's doing really well, and it's getting a lot of attention. So I think we're really happy about that.
So we can read on your website whether material or immaterial, Eash's work employs the body as a working document, an avatar to represent the desires of a post-capitalist, post-colonial, post-gender self, an interface between a queer rural artist of the Indigenous American and Irish diasporas and the Anglo-colonial realms of high culture. In what ways do you see yourself and your practice as an interface between the Indigenous worldview, arts, and the English or colonial European world of what you call high culture?
Well, I mean, I guess just speaking frankly, it's just my life. I mean, it's quite strange because people don't know very much about the identity, and their perceptions of it are usually based off of fantasy, which is largely colonial invention. But I am an artist that exists in, a European elite art world. I have my own struggles with it for obvious reasons, but I'm also somebody who grew up in my ancestral territory, barefoot most of the time, in severe subaltern levels of poverty, families struggling with incarceration, sometimes addiction, and a lot of generational trauma. I didn't grow up with cable or internet. Very modest means, a similar life to anybody growing up on like a reservation. Just sometimes you don't even have that. But I also exist in this world where, through being gifted in some sense in regards to art and expression and speaking and singing and dancing and all that, I've entered into this place, and it's very, very strange. And very, very few people can relate to this absolute shifting of worlds. But I think what's been really incredible and heartbreaking at the same time is to be born into this destitution, and to get older and older and understand that so much of it is systemic, that when you're an occupied people, the success isn't what the world around you wishes. There's a sense that they want you to kind of just fade away or forfeit your cultural and spiritual connections, and also your right to sovereignty, your right to land, your right to reparations for land theft, genocide, and slavery. And the deeper and deeper I get into this quote-unquote success, as somebody who's in the arts, the more and more you kind of understand like all the things that have been stolen. And I think this is like a really, really difficult thing for people to talk about, because it just seems so like innumerable, the amount of people that are affected by this. And it's so big, and we're so used to it because we've been doing it for so many generations. But I find that people deal with that by making the occupied people, making the genocided people, making the people who have had so many crimes that are unfolding and becoming public, the more and more as time rolls on, that they make us into fiction. And so I think within art, it's really when you can really air your subjective self, and you can out your personal histories, and you have to put a face, and you have to put a reality to the fiction. You have to put a face to the demographic. You have to tell these stories, which are about, so much about like humanity and like an incredibly bleak existence that's also incredibly beautiful. And I think that that's something I try to communicate in my art into this world, is like it's an exchange. Right? Like, I'm happy to give gifts of art that comes from me, but I also need the cost of like a deep allegiance and an allyship to help occupied peoples of the world. And so I think that it's just accepting the situation that in my life, it's not really a goal, it's just making peace with it. And it also speaks to my role as a two-spirit, which is an identity a lot of people don't understand, how sometimes you have ability, or you're born to a certain way of existence that's helpful to people. And that's something that's so empowering for queer people, to not see yourself and your body as just some material thing, about what are your sexual actions, but rather it's the qualities of your nature, it's your spiritual connection. So on that forefront, in regards to gender, in regards to queerness, in regards to even feminism, are things that I grapple with. But I mean, all of it, I think the most healthy way, which I understood from a lot of suffering and a lot of like thinking and reflection and a lot of help from my elders, is that you have to carve out like a state of sovereignty, which is something you can do in your art. Look, more disrespect.
What do you think about my project that I want to collaborate with you, called Indigenous Reborn?
I think it's a great project. Like I said earlier, we absolutely need as many allies as possible. We're 2% of the population that's dominated by 98% of the population. And that population is diverse, and not all of them are direct descendants of colonists, but if they don't uphold occupied peoples, then they do become colonists. That's kind of how we feel, because that's how we hold other natives accountable, right? Like there's a politic to the identity. There's absolutely an allegiance to the identity, but we're so few. We're more than people think, but we are still few, and so bent down because simply the existence of so many people on our lands just kind of makes us go silent. And so, whilst I absolutely believe that Indigenous peoples can do the work of liberating themselves and liberating other people, the job is a lot easier if other people see themselves liberated through these Indigenous worldviews. So I absolutely think that people should understand not just other Indigenous cultures and what they mean, not from just this type of colonial consumptive lens, but also to understand, let artists tell you the stories themselves and listen. I really think that's really the job of Europeans right now, is they have to listen. I say that as somebody of European descent who's done the work, but you need to sit back and listen and let you hear things that challenge your worldview, because you're not happy, right? I'm going to say that directly to you, like whoever's sitting behind this camera. Y'all aren't happy, right? So why would we want to become you? Why would you want me to be that? I'm not that. I tried. May almost killed me. And I think that you have to understand that this culture that's so consumptive and destroyed so many different people also destroyed you. Everyone suffers under colonialism. And I do mean that. Even people who are wealthy, and have all these palaces, there's still a type of suffering that I could smell when I go into these spaces. And I think that having people in France, like Dora, talking about this, giving opportunities to other Indigenous artists to say these things and to be direct and have that conversation, it's not just helpful for us, it's helpful for you, right? I don't understand it. For somebody who comes from subaltern poverty, how can you have so many resources and have such beautiful homes and such beautiful clothing and have such delicious food and still be so sad, right? So, in our culture, we make good medicine, and it's not just something you buy from a pharmacy. Good medicine can be a song, good medicine can be a basket, so therefore good medicine can be a painting. And I think that do not come to Indigenous people thinking that that we're come to you with empty hands. Don't come to us to think that we beg. Come to us understanding that we are also so kind and so incredibly brave and generous to have you take everything, and for us to come to you and also want to give you more of this good medicine. But we can only be liberated if you liberate yourself. From what I know is that we need more people to understand these things. We need people to really think reflectively about what they're doing with their life and understand that if they just exist passively, as is, apolitically, that it's not apolitical to be benefiting from these resource extraction, benefiting from genocide, benefiting from this control. You have to absolutely take action, and you have to foster allegiance. But in order for you to do that, you first have to sit back and just listen to us, to let us tell our stories, right? And it's gonna touch you. It's going to reach you, and that's what you're afraid of.